Okay, I'll get about practice for this. So thank you all for, how many of you is this your first Spaceport lecture? Shame on you. I'm going to audience shame to get started. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. We've been running this series since 2011. We've had all sorts of really cool people, including the person tonight. My name is David Alexander. I'm the director of the Space Institute here at Rice University. And this is something that we'll be doing with the help of the Houston Spaceport. Usually my buddy Arturo is here. He's our sponsor. He couldn't make it tonight, so he sends his apologies. But what we try and do is just engage in a broad set of discussions. For the first time in probably about 6 or 7 years, I have the whole semester program planned. Usually I'm doing it like the week before. So we're very honored to have tonight's speaker first, and I'll introduce Judy in a second. Our next, because of the pressure of classrooms for Rice, we're moving a different auditorium every time, just to keep you on your toes. So just make sure you follow the directions that we send out, either on LinkedIn or through our email. If you're not on our email list, please go to rsi.rice.edu. And if you follow the Spaceport lectures link, there's a little thing. So RSI. And if you're one of my students, you know you can't read my writing. But if you go there and you sign up, all we do is let you know about events like this. We don't try and sell you stuff or anything. So, so I'll talk yet. Yeah. My executive director there. He's always thinking about the dollar. No, so October 3rd, we have a speaker from Colorado School of Mines who's one of the leading experts in finding and getting resources off the moon, and that's very important for what NASA's hoping to do in the future and the commercial companies. November 3, which I think I've just realized is 2 days with, no, it can't be 2 days before the election. What date did I say? Maybe the election's the 7th, right? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I think November 3, we have an English professor. We're trying to start a kind of space and humanities series of discussions. So hopefully we'll have something to announce then for that. And then our final lecture of the semester will be December, sometime in the first week of December. I should have been better prepared. And that will be a former colleague of Judy's, the head of robotics at Dodson Space Center, who's now the deputy director of the Space Institute at Texas A&M, big robotics lead, so he's going to come and talk to us about robotics for space and so on. And there'll be some other things that we'll be doing, I think, through the course of the semester, and we'll keep you posted on that. And then I'll start planning for the spring. So tonight's speaker is someone, we've known each other for a wee while, right? So quite a while. And I was telling somebody this earlier, I kind of kept going to Judy and saying, hey, who could we get to speak? And I realized I was being insulting because we're one of the best speakers here, and I never invited her until now. So we've always, Judy's been a great friend of Rice, a great friend of the Space Institute. You'll hear about her work, and then of course a little bit about her bio. But personally, I'm really happy that she's here. It's been a long time coming, and so we're excited because I know what she does. I'm not sure what she's going to tell you she does, but I know what she does do. And it's pretty cool, and again, everything, Johnson Space Center, if you ever get a chance to go there, jump at it, because you look in one door and you see amazing stuff, you look in another door, you see another one. And I'm talking to the guys in the spacesuit and the astronomy shop there. I was looking a little bit younger, but yeah. Okay, so Dr. Judith Hayes is the Chief Science Officer for the NASA Human Health and Performance Directorate. HHP we call it, so anything to do with to do with the astronauts and what they need to do and how they need to do it. Our local Johnson Space Center. She's responsible for human health and performance science, policy, strategy, and partnerships. And she focuses on understanding and mitigating the risks that spaceflight poses on the human system. So we're going to hear a lot about that in Judy's work tonight. Judy performs spaceflight experiments to study the effects of microgravity on the skeletal muscle performance of astronauts, and most recently as NASA biomedical research and leading interdisciplinary biomedical teams responsible for research operations and project management aspects supporting various NASA programs related to human space exploration. I've been talking to people since about 7 o'clock this morning, so excuse my bumbling, it's not just my accent. In 2023, she was the department chair of the Human Performance in Space for the International Space University Summer Program, which last year was held in Brazil. This year she didn't get to go quite so exotic place. She had to come to Rice. We hosted the International Space University Summer Program this year here at Rice, and Judy was a key element in helping put it together and be part of it. Some of our students who volunteered at UCM and looking at did a lot of work there. Some of you have got, I had a handful of backpacks that some of you got tonight from that program. Judy received her Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Exercise Physiology from West Virginia University, and a Master of Public Health from the University of Texas Health Science Center, and relatively recently, right, Doctor of Philosophy in Leadership Studies at Lady of the Lake University. So quite a range of expertise, quite an impressive collection of awards, including a Silver Snoopy. That's what I'm aiming for. A Silver Snoopy awarded by the NASA astronauts, an induction at the West Virginia University Academy of Distinguished Alumni, and finally, probably a really important thing here, Judy volunteers with Astra Femina, a non-profit organization for inspiring girls towards STEM disciplines. Very wonderful person, very all-round, giver of her knowledge, and a wonderful scientist to boot. Please join me in welcoming Judy.
So it's my pleasure to be here. It has been a long time coming because we've known each other for a couple of decades. And this bio says a lot, but really, I became a manager of scientists for a long time, and then they just eventually bumped me up to be the chief scientist. But it's really the work that I'm going to talk about today is really the work of a village of people, and we'll try to keep it light, and hopefully you'll learn something along the way. So, and I hope this works. So, first quiz, the only quiz. Do you know how many people are in space today, as of now? As of maybe 6 hours ago? Anybody? I actually saw it on the news, so.
14.
Ooh, that's a lot. Even more than that have been to space. But today, there's 9 people on the space station. That includes Soyuz, SpaceX, and of course our Starliner crew that's going to be there until January. We have just launched yesterday. It's been a busy week in space for humans. Yesterday we've launched 4 people, all commercial astronauts on SpaceX with Polaris Dawn, and they have just gone about 870 miles, so past the space station, which is only about 250 miles into space. So there's 4 of those. They're going to do an EVA, 2 EVAs this week, or 2 of them are going to do EVAs this week. So that's 4 more. Oh, the Chinese have 3 on their station. And then we just launched Don Pettit and his Russian crewmates about 6 hours ago from Kazakhstan on a Soyuz MS-26. So he will be joining the space station crew and shortly. And so when we count it all up, we have broken a record today. In case you didn't notice, there are 2 space stations in space. There are currently 2 free flyers, one's a Soyuz and one's a SpaceX, and 19 people. 11 are from the US, 5 from Russia, and 3 from China. So it is a busy time to be getting into the space industry. So we're very excited about it. I really, when I started adding up the numbers, I knew that it was busy at work, but this has been a busy week. So, so lots of good going on, and human spaceflight is flourishing. So a little bit about our exploration campaign. If you haven't seen it, it's a little bit of an old chart, but it really just tells you that there's a lot of work happening in low Earth orbit, exactly what we were just talking about. And then our goal at NASA is to go back to the moon, hopefully in 2025. We do have some unmanned rovers up there already, and then on to Mars eventually. And of course, we've had rovers there for a while. So that's kind of the big picture. So at NASA, we don't lose sight of this. This is actually a picture from 2014 from the rover Curiosity. And it is looking back at Earth, and that little dot, you can see my cursor there, I'm trying to move it without messing things up. Well, that little dot is Earth. So when we finally send people to Mars, they have to have everything they need with them or stationed there already. Because when they want to call home, it's 44 minutes round trip to get an answer. And everybody they know, other than the crew they're with and the stuff they took with them, is on Mars. Everything else is on Earth, and that looks like a star to me. So it's a long way away. So, as David said, I'm from the Human Health and Performance Directorate. This is where we study the astronaut health, study their physiology and behavioral health, and we also take care of the crew members clinically. So because the astronauts, most of them live here, the NASA astronauts mostly live in Houston, we train them mostly here, and we take care of them here, and they live here. So this is why we are located here. A little bit about what we know. Spaceflight is a hostile environment for humans. And there are several hazards. I'll talk about the hazards in a bit. And we have bucketed the hazards, and we have looked at the evidence that we have over the last 60 some years on what evidence we have, whether it's our medical records of astronauts, whether it's research we did on astronauts, or research we did on analog astronauts, or just terrestrial medicine and physiology, to help us better understand what happens to the body in space and how we can mitigate that. And then, of course, we also take those hazards and the evidence and we bucket it into 30 risks. We call them human system risks. And each one of those risks, we have risk owners, and there's a physician and a scientist and an epidemiologist, and they will scour the evidence that we already have and try to assess where we're at and how much risk there is. We use a kind of an engineering tool. It's like the red, yellow, green 5x5 stoplight, and it gives us an idea of how well we're doing. And then in the end, once we characterize those risks, we have to figure out either how to mitigate the risk, to develop new technologies, new medical standards for how you build habitats or how you build vehicles, and any treatments along the way. So the 5 risks are, and I think the acronym they use is RIDGE, but it's space radiation exposure, isolation in a closed environment, the distance from Earth matters, gravitational fields, is it microgravity, is it 1/6 gravity, is it 1/3 gravity, what is it 1G? And then the closed environment that they're living in long term. And our job is to protect astronaut health and performance, and we align all of our risks with those 5 hazards. I know this is a kind of an eye chart, but we have bucketed those 30 risks under each one of those hazards. And so what you might be able to see is, one of these might be bone loss. And so how do we mitigate bone loss? Well, do we need to mitigate it in low Earth orbit or on the moon or on Mars? So we look at each one of those, what we call a design reference mission. And I know this is another eye chart, but this is how we communicate how well we're doing. And in the columns on the right-hand side, the first column is in low Earth orbit, and it's short and long duration, so under 30 days, we would consider a short duration mission before your physiology starts really becoming desynchronous, and long duration. And then in the middle, we have 2 versions of the lunar risks. It's like lunar orbit risks, short and long duration, and then lunar surface operations, short and long duration. And on the very right-hand side where you see some red, those are the missions going to Mars. And pretty much any mission to Mars is going to be a long duration mission. Our normal mission to Mars is about 900 days. 6 months to get there, 18 months to stay on the surface, and then another 6 to 9 months to get back. So we characterize each one of those risks based on the evidence that we have. So just as an example, this is the human system risk. It's a generic, what we call generic lunar mission. And so each one of those dots, circles, is one of those 30 risks. And you can see what that looks like. There's a few red risks. So going to the moon isn't just a slam dunk. We still have some work to do. There's some yellow risks where maybe it's okay to go because we've mitigated it. And then there's some green risks. So if you, I don't have a pointer here, so if you look, the bone is a green risk here for going to a standard lunar mission. But when we start talking about going to Mars, and like I said, that's a 900-day mission at best. So suddenly, bone becomes red, but a lot becomes red, and the rest is yellow. We don't really quite have all the risks mitigated yet. So this gives us a way to communicate and to track how well we're doing and how ready we are to send humans. Kind of the collective knowledge talks about, yeah, we get bone loss, we lose urinary calcium pretty quickly, even on the short missions, a few days on a space shuttle. Skeletal muscle loss, size changes, loss of strength and endurance, loss of muscle capillary density. Neurosensory, a lot of vestibular differences that occur very quickly in spaceflight. So you stop getting those vestibular cues and the proprioception cues, and when you're in space you become a visual animal because you're not getting those gravitational cues. Then when you return, all that comes rushing back as gravity hits you, and there's a lot of disorientation and adaptation that goes on to recover from being acclimated to spaceflight over days. So we have some sensory motor issues, postural instability, some locomotor problems, some manual control problems if you're piloting something. So things to consider. Cardiovascular changes, loss of fluid almost before they even leave, orthostatic intolerance when they get back, changes in aerobic capacity. Recently, a few years ago, we discovered venous thrombosis. We had not seen that before. And then this thing called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, which is a combination of a lot of things that we don't quite understand yet. Psychosocial issues. You're isolated with teams all the time. You're living with people that you're working with. So there's lots of team issues, fatigue issues, other things to address that can cause cognitive decline and causing some errors. And then environmental issues like hearing loss because it is a little bit loud to be in a spacecraft, and radiation exposure, so risks of cataracts and cancer and other stuff. And then some potential skin irritations from some potential microbial growths inside the vehicle, although we do keep it quite clean. So our goals to sustain crew members' well-being, to minimize their deconditioning while they're in space, to optimize their in-flight performance because they are going to have to go do an EVA, which is a spacewalk, either in microgravity or eventually back on the planetary surface, to prepare for rapid egress in the event of an emergency. There are some circumstances where they will have to save themselves, and those being in those spacesuits even before you leave in decondition are quite heavy and cumbersome. So to go through days or months of exposure to microgravity, getting yourself out in a 60-pound or 100-pound spacesuit might be a challenge. And then promote an optimal rate of recovery. We want them to come back in great shape, as good a shape as we can keep them in, so that they only have to do a few weeks of recovery and rehab, and then they're back on flight status. Now, they don't turn around and fly in 2 months, but we want to get them back to fitness so they can do their job. So, space flight is a team sport. I think lots of jobs these days are team sports. And so in Health and Human Performance, we have an assortment of clinicians, engineers, physiologists, data scientists, biostatisticians, microbiologists and toxicologists, all the ologists that have to work together and have to learn to communicate. And engineers don't always speak the same way a physician do. We all have to try to learn to use the same vernacular, which can be very much a challenge for us. But we can't do it alone. And of course, the astronauts are part of it. We are taking care of people who are from the 1st to the 99th percentile of stature and other anthropometric measures. And this is one of my favorite pictures because it definitely shows that Nancy Curry, who's the shorter one, is not like the others who are all like 6 foot or more. I will tell you, on that mission, she actually had one of the biggest jobs because she was using the robotic arm to stack the first 2 modules of the space station. So she had the biggest job, but the smallest person.
And Judy, I think 3 of those had a rice connection, at least 3.
At least 3.
Mass, Nancy.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a good crew, and they had very important jobs, but, you know, I was rooting for Nancy because she was in there swinging with the rest of them. So a lot of things that we have to do is we have to look at what does the job take. What are the occupational tasks that are required of crew members when they go into space, whether they're 5 foot tall or 6 foot 4. And this is one of the hardest jobs, and it's EVA. And that suit can weigh 350 pounds. Now in space, it doesn't, but you still have to move that mass around, and they're working for 6 to 8 hours, and kind of at a low burn, you know, low metabolic load, but for many hours, plus the cognitive load as they're monitoring their resources and know what tasks they have to do is very challenging for the crew. So again, EVA, in flight, and then eventually back to planetary ops. And I did put a picture up on the upper right, which is a picture of the new Axiom spacesuit that will take us back to the moon. We also, as I said earlier, sometimes they have to get out on their own. They have emergency egress, whether it's out of a capsule into the water and swimming or paddling to a lifeboat, or in some of these cases here are rappelling down the side of the space shuttle after they've climbed out of the overhead windows, or sliding out the side hatch. Sometimes they will have to recover themselves. And then of course there's a lot of finesse in piloting, and of course we did, you know, our crews did a great job landing space shuttles. I mean, right on the money almost every time. It was pretty remarkable how well they could do that, even in these long duration missions. But with the newer lunar landers, they are not going to be like the Apollo landers where they just kind of hover a bit and land. There's going to be some dynamic parts of the profile, the landing profile, that'll be challenging, and so manual control and some other physiological activities will have to be engaged in those crew members, and so there's a lot of the neurosensory parts of that will come into play. And we are just now trying to study that because we didn't have to do that in Apollo. So Soyuz lands on the land. As you probably saw this past week, the Starliner came home without the crew, but it also lands on the land. But SpaceX is back to doing water landings, which is kind of a challenge to chase down the crew wherever they happen to find a spot to land in the Gulf lately, or the Atlantic, and they're going to start doing landing in the Pacific as well. So we generally have our scientists there and our flight surgeons there to help pull the crew out, do the quick once-over, get some early testing, because as they come back from space, they start adapting to gravity as soon as it hits. And so we want to get to them as quickly as possible. So we'll have some folks, some of our science teams will be there and do some quick tests. They put the crew in a jet, bring them back to Johnson Space Center, and immediately they come right into the labs and they start testing again. So it's, we think it's an exciting time, and I'm not so sure the crew loves having to be tested, but they understand the importance of it. And then just kind of our organization does operations. Of course, we do the clinical stuff, whether they're on the Earth or in space, and take care of the crew wherever they are. But we do mostly applied research when we're doing research, and sometimes there's some crossover between the ops and the research, which helps us be efficient in our testing. So we'll be testing crews while they're in space, but we also have analogs like people in bed rest, people in these checking out the new spacesuits. We'll also have crew members, another Rice grad, Kevin Whitson, in the glove box, doing some research either on potentially rodents or pharmaceuticals, and then some work in the lab, some bioreactor work in the lab, and sequencing work. So there's a little bit of everything. It's actually keeps it interesting. In the upper left-hand corner is the ultrasound, and they're using the ultrasound. It is our one imaging tool that we have in space, and they're looking at the eye because of this eye issue that we have. But of course, we look at the cardiovascular system. We also measure muscle size or change in muscle size with it, and then some of the flight surgeons will take the time to examine some other organs. These crew members get maybe 2 hours of training on an ultrasound, and they become quite proficient. We'll have a team on the ground in mission control, one of the back rooms in mission control, that'll do remote guidance with them. So they'll be able to help them find the best images as they're working through that. So it really is a telemedicine type of activity. Isolation. We know that going to Mars is a big deal, and the crews will be isolated for a long time. We use isolation in some habitats that we have, some here, some in Russia. We also do studies at the South Pole. So, and underwater. I think I have some pictures up there of underwater. So we are assessing a lot of the environmental, behavioral, cognitive types of tests, and food, the space food for Mars, in these isolation habitats. And they can be anywhere from a few days or weeks, or we just had a crew of 4 finish a 378-day Martian-like habitat mission down at the Johnson Space Center in one of our newer habitats called Chapia. So, just as a quick look, how we transition some of the research that we're doing to operations. We has to be aligned with one of those risks. We look at basic biomedical research. Much of that may have been done by other centers or people at other institutions. And then we will eventually usually do an analog evaluation, whether it's in bed rest or parabolic flight or in one of those isolation chambers. And then we'll try to fly it to validate it, to make sure everything we've learned on the ground actually works in space. Sometimes the lines are blurred between flight validation and ops, because as soon as we find out it works, we don't want to stop. We just keep going and turn it into an operational tool. So a little about Space Station. Our approach to astronaut health is not rocket science. The first thing we do is select the right people. We're going through that now. We have a new crew of candidates that have applied. They're just now culling through those resumes and applications. The references have gone out. Requests for references have gone out. So probably in the next 6 months, you will see us announce a new astronaut class. So selection is important. Everything from general health to a great deal of behavioral assessments and team assessment. But we try to pick the ones that are the healthiest, and also physiologically, medically, and from a behavioral health standpoint, mentally and emotionally. It is it makes our life easier if we pick the right people from the beginning. And I think that's true anytime you try to hire somebody. But these are big investments for our nation, so it's important that we try to get those folks that we think can succeed. And then, of course, it comes down to, you know, what our mother says: nutrition, the right amount of sleep, exercise, and then something we call expeditionary skills. Some people come with expeditionary skills already embedded in them based on either their innate understanding or actually in practice from the jobs that they've had before. So quickly, you know, we do have a food lab and a nutrition lab, two different things. The food lab makes the food and packages the food, which is a big risk for going to Mars, because trying to make food and pre-position in a year and a half in advance is a big challenge. And you don't even know who the crew may be, or 2 years in advance on Mars. And it has to be there for years, not just months. But these folks also make the food and do the resupplies and send them up for a station right now. We have a lot more ability to get the crew fresh fruit, and some, you know, their favorite cookies from home. That will not happen when we go to Mars. They will not get the fresh fruit. They will not get the cookies from home. They will be stuck with what we already pre-positioned their years in advance. You know, one of my favorite things, tacos. The tortillas have kind of replaced the bread, because bread crumbles and the crumbs get into everything, into the equipment, but also in your eyes. So we find that they use tortillas for just about everything. But we do track their intake. We have an app that was created with actually crowdsourcing, and we use that app to track their nutrients, you know, what their food. It's nice because we know exactly what's on order. They can't just order pizza. So we know exactly what's available to them. But it's very easy for them to track, and then they can get feedback immediately, like whether they have had too much salt in their diet or whether they haven't drank enough that day. And that also gets downloaded to our team. And there's a book, and I think there's a link there to a children's book. It's actually pretty thorough. So even if you're not a child, I think it's worthwhile. And you can get it for free online, written by our dietitians and our nutritional biochemists. So sleeping in space is a little bit different. These are pictures of folks sleeping on station. On the upper left is a crew member in his crew quarters, and they're small. It's like a closet. But they sleep in these sleeping bags, either against the wall or in I think that's Paolo Nespoli, one of our Italian astronauts, just kind of hanging in the middle of the station and sleeping. They all have kind of their own way to get comfortable. Some like to free float, some like to be pinned against a wall, some have back pain when they sleep, so they'll curl up. They all have different process. They're scheduled 8 hours a day. Often they don't get it, but that's what they're scheduled for in their timeline. And we do track that. We also have a fatigue management program, and that's because we sleep shift them during certain tasks. So the days when they're going to do an EVA, the day before, they may have to shift their sleep. Or the day before a docking of another vehicle coming on board, like Don Pettit heading up to the station, they will sleep shift to prepare for those. And we have a whole fatigue management tool that tells them when to take naps, and when to rest and when not to rest, and how to shift their time. And we do watch this, and in fact our immunology people and our behavioral health people track this quite closely, because we do know that if you don't get enough sleep, it can add to the stress, and your body can reflect that. So exercise ends up, it seems like it's a simple thing, something that we all do here. It's not so simple in space. We are very lucky to have a resistance exercise device, a treadmill, and a cycloergometer. And we also have something called a portable pulmonary function device that allows us to test aerobic capacity too. So that's how we assess their fitness. And then we'll do a isometric mid-thigh pull on our resistance exercise tool so that we can get an idea of how strong they are, how much aerobic capacity they have lost. They have to do this every day for they are scheduled 2.5 hours a day. And that includes some cleanup and some reconfiguring of hardware, but they're doing quite a bit of exercise. But 23 hours a day, they're floating. So they're not getting any of that input or stress on their body, on their bones, or their muscles, or their cardiovascular system. So it's important that we do this. We will do quite a bit of high intensity work. This is Sunny. Sunny likes the treadmill. Sunny, I know a lot of people were worried about Butch and Sunny. They are fine. This is Sunny's happy place on this treadmill. She's a big marathoner and triathlete, so this is where she likes to be. This is the treadmill. I'll tell you, I'm going to show you a video in a little bit, and what I want you to see and look for in the video is how the harness fits, because that's a challenge. We have a really hard time making those harness fit comfortably. It's got some bungees in the straps on the bottom, and then it hooks to the harness, and we try to get them to load up to about 80% of their body weight. After that, it gets a little uncomfortable. So we want to keep that load on their axial skeleton to try to put that impact on their bones as well as they're running in their sprints. And I also want you to look at the platform of the treadmill when she's running, when you see the video, because it's floating. All these devices cannot be hard mounted to the walls and station because that pounding will fatigue those modules and reduce the life of those modules. So we've had to float everything that we use for exercise. And for each of these devices, I want you to watch for that in the video when I show it to you in a minute. So we also have a cycle ergometer. This is, they use this for cardiovascular fitness also. They kind of swap treadmill running and cycle depending on the day. But this is also the tool that we use to measure aerobic fitness. And it does change over the course of a mission. And the teal ergometer, we call it the teal ergometer because it's teal, is brand new and it just went up about a year ago. So that's the one on the right, but it's essentially the same cycle. And that actually, all these isolation devices are a little bit different. That actually sits in the lab module on a wall, and what you'll notice you need to look for is underneath their bottom, there is no seat. They don't need a seat. They are attached to the cycle by these Shimano pedals, Shimano clips on their shoes, and they kind of pedal, sort of looks like it's standing up, and they push into a seat back, but there's no seat underneath them. And you'll be able to watch that that rack float a little bit with the cycle over the lab racks. And then this one's a little sportier. This is called the ARED, the Advanced Resistance Exercise Device. This has a resistance up to 600 pounds, and they can do something like 26 different exercises. Of course, we want them to focus on the anti-gravity muscles, so using squats and deadlifts and trying to do some other core activities, bench and overhead press, and I think that's in the video. This one will be obvious on how much it's floating. It's like being inside of a clam. So take a look at that as we hit the video. And then our Russian colleagues also have countermeasures. They have a treadmill, which we call BD2. They have Russian expanders are essentially bungees, and they can give them up to about 80 pounds of force, and then a cycle ergometer as well. And then they also issue everybody, I think they get 3 of these in mission, but these are called the penguin suits, and it's essentially a flight suit that's laced with bungees on the inside of it. And this brave guy up here on the left showed you what those bungees look like without the suit overlaying it. And they can pull on those straps to try to tighten them up. So every time they move their torso, their back, their upper body, or their legs, they're going to get a resistance as they're floating around. I've not seen any evidence to validate this, but they do issue those to the crew members, to all of them, even the U.S. crew members. So let's see if I can get the video going. So this is a video that Crew 4 did. And I might need help here. Maybe that'll work. Okay. So node 3 is where the treadmill and the ARED are. So I don't know if you can tell. Okay, you can see maybe the platform floating. Maybe not. You can see that the harness fits a little differently on each person. This is, now you can see this one. This is the actual CVIS on the wall of the lab module. And then this is an ARED. This is the overhead of a squat and a deadlift. So you see that's not mounted to the wall at all. There's a bench press. They were getting creative with their video. Overhead press. And then that's what a sit-up looks like. They can do cable exercises as well as bar exercises on that. So the crew, even crews that probably don't like to exercise so much here, they actually do like it because it does load their body, otherwise they don't get any load at all. And we have found that as we've been able to add better modalities over time, we've seen improvements in the outcomes with these crew members. So we do have an astronaut gym. They don't have much time pre-flight, so they don't always go to the gym as much as we'd like pre-flight. Post-flight, they have a 45-day recovery period where they have 2 hours a day focused with a trainer, and most of them do recover quite nicely within 45 days, and then after that, they're released to go do public affairs and speaking engagements, so we got to make sure they're in good shape before we release them to that. Only a handful have we had to extend that post-flight recovery time. So a little bit about expeditionary skills. Has anybody heard of expeditionary skills before? So these actually were developed by our psychology team to try to come up with competencies and skills that will help people thrive in space. So our crew members train in a lot of ways, and so they can exercise these or practice these skills while they're doing their training, either out in the field doing survival training or other training that they're doing, you know, in T-38s, in the jets, or in the pool here in Houston to train for spacewalks, or other analogs. So they do get quite a bit of survival training out in the field. It helps us to train them for working on the space station, on the moon, and of course for Mars. So, but as I said earlier, all this starts with selection, and this is the first group, and you know, they came because of their experience. They came as pretty resilient and self-aware individuals that really were able to keep their cool in the face of danger. So that's what they used to call the right stuff. But we've now categorized these competencies, and we've narrowed it down to 5. So we talked a little bit about self-care already. We talked about hygiene. You know, we didn't talk about hygiene, but hygiene is big, especially if you're living with the people you're working with for 6 months or a year. So hygiene, sleep, as we said earlier, diet and exercise, but emotional regulation, being able to self-regulate in stressful times is massively important in an astronaut when you're in the confines of a small space under great stress and danger. Being able to regulate yourself first is key in being able to work with your team. And having that resilience after a bad day or a tough time is really critical. So teamwork, this is actually the Apollo 13 folks in Mission Control after they brought back the wayward Apollo Apollo 13 mission safely. So teamwork is critical. I can get this to go. We find that, in fact, more now, and you didn't see a whole lot of it back in the 60s, but more now, that team diversity and culture and skill set and disciplines is very critical to being a strong team, because we don't all have all the pieces and all the perspectives. So the more perspectives we can bring to a problem, the stronger we can be. And then, of course, we're stronger as a team when we're all pulling together. So these guys have lots of opportunity to, astronauts from the time we hire them and they become ASCANs. They have 2 years of training as astronaut candidates before they're assigned, able to be assigned to a flight. They they have a lot of opportunity in the field, doing all kinds of training to practice some of these skills as they go. Communication is a big one, and I think every corporate survey that comes out, communication's always, we can always be better. You can't over communicate, but it's really important here. Important when you're on orbit to communicate with mission control. Important for crew members to communicate with each other, even on days where they might not see eye to eye. Important to keep the communication flowing, and then also we try to do our best to give them the tools so that they can communicate with their family and friends at home. Some of those things are going to, the top and bottom one are going to be hard to do when you're on Mars, and you may have, your crewmates, maybe all you have to talk to in tough times, because it is going to be such a, the delayed communication is going to be very much a challenge for our crews. Small team living. This is that living and eating and working all in the same space. It's critical to be able to learn how to do this. I kind of liken this to the Sheldon Cooper roommate agreement. I don't know if you guys are Big Bang Theory fans, but where you look after each other, you look after yourself, and you take care of each other. Again, even in days when it's stressful, if you can help your crewmate, the next time they may help you if you need it. And then, of course, team care. And they do learn some of these. They get a lot of training from our behavioral health team on managing conflict, on team cohesion, and they do quite a bit of field exercise where we put them in stressful conditions and teach them how to use their tools. And again, Peggy Whitson, the Rice is represented here. Leadership and followership, huge. We hire people that are usually pretty good leaders. They've been, number one at their discipline, whether they're a pilot or a doctor or a scientist or an engineer. So they're usually pretty good leaders, but often we have to train them on how to be followers. We're now actually in astronaut selection. We've been testing for this and testing them in team exercises to see whether they can shift from their leadership from leadership to followership, and how that works, because it happens all the time during a mission. So astronauts will practice this continuously through their training, but you'll essentially eventually know when it's time to lead. And this is Chris Cassidy, who at that time was training to go on station, but he was also the head of the astronaut office. And then also knowing when to follow. So sometimes you're not the leader. Sometimes somebody else is better at something than you, whether it's for technical reasons or other reasons that they might take leadership roles. So some other more good advice from our astronauts is, let's see if I can make this move. When you've got a big challenge ahead of you, these folks have the confidence that they know that they can thrive. This was our almost 1 year mission, our first almost 1 year mission with Scott Kelly. But if you have that confidence, it helps you push through. Another thing is proactively manage your expectations. Some of these folks are used to being the best of the best. And sometimes, you know, you're going to run into a challenge where you're not used to being awkward or failing at something the first time you do it. So managing expectations, and then also giving meaning to the experience. This is Polyakov, who I think this mission was over, I think 423 days on the Russian Mir. It was the first super long mission. And if you just take the time to embrace the experience, even though it can be challenging, it's important to try to, live in that moment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're opening space for others, because I don't know how many people talk about this, but I thought I'd throw it in here. Since you may remember Stephen Hawking's, I think it was 2007, the Zero-G Corp parabolic aircraft team invited him to fly in zero gravity in a parabolic aircraft. And there were lots of physicians with him, but he did fly, and that kind of opened the doors for what we call Astro Access. This is a group, it's a nonprofit group, not affiliated with NASA, but they have taken it on themselves to promote those with disabilities to be able to experience zero gravity, Martian gravity, and lunar gravity on these parabolic missions. They also have a team of flight surgeons that are helping them do this, and they have been flying teams of what they call the Astro Access ambassadors, of people with different kinds of disabilities, to be able to experience what it feels like to be able to free float or have partial gravity. This is just the beginning, I think, of opening these doors to people who otherwise would not have had those advantages. And so this is just one of the groups that actually, afterwards, that actually flew in parabolic flight. But ESA, which has been our European Space Agency partners, have been very progressive in looking into what they call the Para-Astronaut Project. Anybody heard of this? They actually were studying whether or not people either with missing limbs or different heights or different leg lengths would be eligible to become an astronaut. And so they did this assessment, then they did their 2021 astronaut selection, and they opened it up to people with certain disabilities. And they selected this guy named Dr. John McFall. He's actually a surgeon, but he also was a Paralympian in the 2008. He was a sprinter in the Paralympics, and he certainly had the resume for it, and he is very fit and able-bodied. He's just missing, one of his lower limbs. So they did select him as one of the ESA astronauts, and he did come to the Johnson Space Center to look at any accommodations we might have to do for him should he be selected to fly. So he's a fairly new astronaut, and we said he was just selected maybe 2 years ago, so he's been going through training, but he did come to the Johnson Space Center to look at the exercise devices, to look at, this is inside one of our mock-ups, to look at what kind of accommodations that he would have to make to be able to operate in a space environment. And he had several limbs with him, several types of limbs with different materials and different attributes. And they were able to narrow down to the capability that would enable him to fly. And they now don't call it Para-Astronaut, they now call it ESA Fly. So look for this guy. He's kind of a remarkable guy. Look for him in the coming years. It'll be a bit, but look for him to represent the United Kingdom and the European Space Agency. So things are changing, and I think they're changing rapidly. And so that, I'm going to end on talking a little bit about Artemis, because we are the Artemis generation now. So Artemis is all about going to the moon for the benefit of humanity. And lots of people say, why go? You know, of course, we say the science. There's life sciences, there's planetary science, physical science, biological, lots of science to be learned. You know, in the past, Apollo's longest mission on the moon was 72 hours. So we have yet a lot to learn about the moon. And we will also be going to different destinations. We'll be going to the South Pole. And so there's other opportunities there from a planetary science, physical science standpoint. But I know I was one of those kids that was inspired by Apollo. And we think that Artemis will inspire the kids of today to also engage in science and hopefully, you know, STEM education and be inspired by spaceflight. Spaceflight is a great platform to inspire kids into STEM education. And then, of course, you know, there's always a little politics in there. It's the national posture of the United States, and they're trying to bring, and you may be seeing it if you're in Houston, you're seeing a lot of commercial industry investing in space and really building the space economy, which is like $489 billion right now, globally, not in Houston, that'd be nice, but globally. There's a lot of money in space flight, not just human space flight, but space flight in general. And the space economy is a big push for our country. So Artemis 2, we've flown Artemis 1, which was a test flight, unmanned test flight. Artemis 2 is coming. We have slipped the date to 2025. So you'll be hearing about it in the news as we get closer and closer. But the crew is selected, and they've been training, and you may have seen their faces out because they are out and about. I'm going to try to make this video run. If you haven't seen them, this doesn't have audio. Well, you're going to miss the audio. So this is the introduction of the first Artemis crew, which is a woman and 3 men, and one of those guys, the guy that's 6'3", that's Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen is the Canadian. First time we're taking a non-U.S. citizen with us to the moon. Victor Glover, and then the commander is Reed Weissman. And I'm sorry, I don't have the audio for you. But you'll see these faces more and more over the next year and a half or so. But we are definitely getting ready to go back to the moon. This crew will go out and circle the moon and come back. So this is a test flight. This is not a landing flight. Artemis 3 will be the first crew to actually step foot on the moon from the Artemis generation. And with that, I have a few things. This just talks about how many nations are operating in space right now. It's a lot. There's a lot going on. But, you know, when we talk to kids, we're always supposed to push the STEM education, but I don't want to leave anybody behind, because engineers and pilots and physicians and scientists are all great. But, you know, to work in the space industry, we also need accountants and lawyers and scuba divers and chefs and all kinds of people. So like I said, I don't like to leave anybody behind, because I think there's room for everybody in this community to keep things going. This is a website for kids, but if you just Google NASA education, you're going to get a ton of stuff. Gotcha. And whoopsie. And then there's a ton of internship opportunities out there for college students. NASA has internships, but I also listed JAXA, our Japanese partners, European Space Agency interns, Canadian interns, and then some of our corporate partners, KBR Leidos, Blue Origin SpaceX, and others. Axiom, I know, also takes interns. I just didn't have them on this page. So I would have, if I was interested as a young person in an internship, I would apply everywhere I was qualified, because it is very competitive, and sometimes it's a numbers game to get yourself in there. This is for other opportunities for medical students and graduate students, postdoctoral fellowships, graduate fellowships. We also have the aerospace medicine clerkship for fourth-year medical students and residents, and that's at the Johnson Space Center. And then of course UTMB is our partner with the aerospace medicine residency, just down in Galveston. They've been a good partner with us. And then finally, for people who are academics or scientists, if you're interested in space, you need to sign up for this NSPIRES, the NASA research announcements. And once you set that up, you will get every announcement that NASA puts out. You know, whether it's on astrophysics or life science, you get them all, so you have to sit through. But it is a great opportunity, and it will lead you through how you can apply for grants with NASA. And then that's it. I don't know how long I went, but thank you for your time and your interest on a rainy day.
So we have time for questions. I don't know if you're on, if you're online, you maybe put in the Q&A, and I'll try and see if I can find them. Are there any questions in the room here? Of course, Linda.
She should know the answers.
I do have a question about the bed rest analog. What's up for research and how long do they last?
So these analogs are all kind of specific. So sometimes they're a few weeks, sometimes they can be a few months. So it depends on the requirements of that study. So if you're doing like a bone study, you're going to be in bed a lot longer than if you're just doing something looking at some fluid shifts, for example. So it just depends. Right now we do all our studies in Cologne, Germany with DLR, the German Space Agency. They have a facility over there called MDHab. But hoping to get a new facility sometime soon, so that we have one local here. But yeah, it's depends on the study requirements.
Zero G is a tremendous stress on the body. Now, I'm interested in what the astronaut called space stupid.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us more about what's going on here?
Well, yeah, they call it space stupids. It has a lot to do, they think, with the fluid shift. So as you go into space, all the fluid that you're carrying in your lower body tends to rise up, and you'll see crew members with puffy faces. And sometimes they can feel congested, but sometimes they can also have some space stupids. They can have some memory challenges, but it's very individual. And I probably didn't talk enough about individual variability, but everybody's different. Of that 30 risks, every crew member doesn't get all of them, but they all get some of them, and some different combination that's just for them. So space stupids does happen. The Russians have recognized it, we've recognized it, and we try to do what we can to work around those things.
In the middle, and then I'll come back, yeah.
So the Starliner crew, they originally go for 8 or 9 days,
Yep.
and now they're 8 months.
Yep.
Would they have trained differently?
Both of these crew members are experienced long-duration crew members. My son has been there several times. This is to transition from a short-duration crew member. They just hit the ground running. I will tell you, having that extra pair of hands up there for extra number of months, so much has gotten done that was on the to-do list. They are amazing and great attitudes. Both, like I said, both of them, and I think it's true of every astronaut. When you actually leave the Earth, leave the planet, you have to be agile, because sometimes space shuttles delay, sometimes your ride home delays, and in this case, this was a test mission, and so it was always a potential that they would have had to pivot in some way. And because Butch and Sonny are used to this. They know the environment. They know the other crew members well. They just transitioned right in seamlessly, and it's been great to have them.
Talk a little bit about the expanded capacity of the ISS to handle the volume that in.
Well, because it's quite big. I mean,
Yeah, but
I think
they recently
Mark's
added.
asking-
we added,
Yeah.
we have,
Can you repeat the question, because I don't think everyone's confused.
so the expanded capacity of the space station. They had,
If they had gone up five years ago, that would have been a completely different.
it would have been
discussion.
different, but we have much more capacity up there. It's very comfortable. Well, I've not been. I hear it's very comfortable there. There's lots of space. I mean, they don't have bedrooms for everybody. They don't have, but there's lots of opportunity. They had, it's easy to do a resupply. We have sent food, clothing, their favorite foods. We have been able to, because we can get to them pretty quickly, and we can resupply things. We have that opportunity to do that. And there's plenty of space for them to live, and there's plenty of opportunity for them to stay busy. The last thing you want is a bored astronaut, and they are not bored. They are really making things happen.
Yeah.
I have two questions. I hope that's okay. My first is in the context of these longer space missions where food is limited and certainly, I guess, fresh food. Are you guys studying the microbiome and how this changes over time in space?
So it's interesting. So the microbiome is just, at least at Johnson, is just kind of taken off. And a lot of the research, I should say, not all of the research happens at Johnson. We do fund, in fact, that's why I put up the research announcements. We fund universities all over the country to help us, because we don't have the expertise in everything. And so there are some studies out there that are looking at the microbiome. And I think they're trying to build a lab in Exploration Park that's going to include that too on the outside of the gate. So yes, so that's on the radar, and there is some funding for that.
And then my second question is for the longer flights or stays. Do you have body composition monitors up there where they're measured regularly to see what happens?
So we can measure mass, but we don't measure body composition while they're in space. We do measure it before and after they go. So we can look at lean mass changes, et cetera. And we're using the DEXA to do that, because we do monitor, because we're monitoring the bone anyway, and we get that bonus with the DEXA scan. But yeah, we do monitor that. And our nutritional biochemist reminds crew members, you have to eat, do not lose weight. This is not the way to get skinny. It's important to keep the weight on. And so they do monitor that from, probably once a month. And then they can make adjustments in their diet and tell them to eat more, eat less, if that's the case. But mostly it's to eat more. Often they'll feel full because they have this fullness already from the fluid shift. So it's make sure they're staying hydrated, drinking, and eating. And what our dietitians will tell the crew is, if their calories aren't high enough, they'll say, eat more, eat more, eat more, and they'll say, I feel full. If they lose weight, if we see they're losing weight, we push it harder. If they're not losing weight, then it's probably okay. But they do monitor that pretty
Oh,
closely.
sorry, CJ, we have a couple of questions online. Lily, are you just going to read them out if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, just tell us who's asking the question and then share the question out, please.
So Chris on Zoom wants to know, how does the Astronaut office select for each mission?
How do they? Well, that is the secret sauce that none of us know. I'd like to say that they have certain skill sets they may be looking for certain types of missions, but I think every astronaut would love to know what it takes to be the first priority on that list. So I don't know. That's a good question. You'll have to ask the chief of the astronaut office that question.
And maybe one other. How many questions are there, Lily?
Oh, we have one more.
Okay, great. So if you wouldn't mind asking that.
Yeah, of course. Anonymous wants to know, on average, how many research projects or experiments are going on, and in what key areas of study?
Oh my gosh. Well, all the risks. I mean, the ones that we fund in the human research area, they're aligned with all those risks those 30 risks that I said. I know that right now we have funded over 200 studies in 26 states around the country that are ongoing right now. They're not, some of them are on the ground, not all of them are in space. But each crew member gets pitched a list of experiments that they can volunteer for. So it could be, they could sign up for 5, they could sign up for 20. It depends on what fits in their schedule, what kind of experiment it is, how much, what the overhead is with that, and what they're willing to do. This is all voluntary. They do not have to participate if they don't feel comfortable with it. It's all consented.
CJ, you had a question, and then I'll come down.
Hi, I was wondering if y'all had noticed any correlation or trends on maybe which astronauts get which symptoms when they go to space and how the effects of the like maybe a power astronaut has more bone problems or maybe one has more optical issues.
Back to the whole individual variability, and I think it's been really a challenge for us. And because even though we've had hundreds fly, all these scenarios and all these mission durations, everything is different. It's really hard to look for those relationships. But I will tell you, as I said before, everybody gets something, but they all kind of get it a little differently. And some with more intensity than others. But, they don't all get motion sick, for example. Some do, some don't. We actually tried to predict that using ground studies of rotating chairs and parabolic flight to try to look at whether that predicted getting motion sick, space motion sickness, and it didn't. What predicts space motion sickness is having gone into space and having had space motion sickness. So the next time you'll probably get it again.
Last 2 questions here first, and then you.
So I noticed there's a bunch of red risks for the Mars category for the long-term physiological.
Lots of work to do.
As I'm personally interested in artificial gravity, do you know of any other promising countermeasures, or is that
So artificial gravity touches a lot of those systems, human systems, and it could potentially solve a lot of those problems. The problem with artificial gravity, and it kind of comes back in favor sometimes, but it's very costly to rotate a vehicle all the way to Mars. So that's really the challenge. And in fact, the physiologists and the physicians and the behavioral scientists are always fighting the engineers to get more tools to make it easier for the human, but the cost and the size of the vehicles and getting there faster also make it easier too. But that comes in favor back and forth. In fact, I think VAST is one of the new commercial companies that has that as part of their. If you look at VAST, this is one of the new commercial companies that is actually looking at artificial gravity, and they want to have their that capability in space, which would be great. We can get it.
Yeah, it's either out of gravity or going fast,
Or going fast.
other methods or countermeasures that look promising instead of that?
Artificial gravity would work if we could get it. I think other than that, it's what we're doing now. We're looking at pharmaceuticals, we're using exercise and diet. We're putting, the things that we push with diet right now is, balanced diet, but also the only supplement that we actually prescribe is vitamin D. We're doing research on vitamin D, but vitamin D is the only one that we're really prescribing there. But sleep, just like here, sleep, diet, exercise, it's kind of the holistic method. But we do have some pharmaceuticals that we've looked at, like bisphosphonates to protect bone and some other things. So yeah, there's no magic bullet yet.
It's hard to stop the fluids moving, even unless you have the gravity. It's hard to stop the fluid going where it wants to go. So it's a big challenge. So we have the last question, sir.
So it was actually a question about medications. On a long trip to Mars, what do you think are the main issues of whether these medications will happen the same way, what are some things you foresee?
So you're spot on. So the radiation exposure and just the the length of time of the degradation, we are not quite sure. So we are looking for new technologies and new ways of handling not just pharmaceuticals, but also food, because by the time, especially if we have to pre-position things, by the time you get there, they can be expired. Normal medications might be expired. So we are looking at trying to find ways to improve on that. That is those two things. I know people are worried about radiation, but behavioral health, food, and pharmaceuticals are really big risks for us. So if anybody has better ideas, we welcome those thoughts, because it's going to be a challenge. It's one of the harder questions that has to be solved.
So I think you could ask about 20 questions for every one of those risks, but I think
there's a website. If you want to look at it, there's always a website.
So again, please join me in thanking Judy. There's a lot to cover. So one thing I wanted to mention is Judy mentioned a lot of things about the teamwork, and she mentioned the ESA fly astronauts. We're hoping to get this out soon, but recently we filmed a conversation between two Olympic athletes, a Paralympic athlete and both of them are former gold medalists from France, talking to two astronauts, all about human performance and how it takes to be at the top of human performance, whether it be in sports or in space. We did it with our friends in France. And so we're looking for a way to, the right format to put that out. So again, you'll hear about it on the mailing list. I happened to be lucky to be the moderator of a fantastic conversation. It was just unbelievable. My favourite part, well, I won't spoil my favourite part. We'll send it out at some point when we've decided. There's a couple of meetings coming up. We might do, I'm looking at you, we might do something down at Space Centre Houston and try and work with them a little bit. So again, thank you for coming out tonight. You know what I say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
I do have NASA
You know the movie that comes from. But listen, hopefully we'll see you again. If you're not on the mailing list, it's a click of a button and we'll get you on there. And we look forward to seeing you back at Rice for some of these talks. So again, thank you very much. And those little young guys with your spacesuits, come out your time.
Come every time.